Hi, and welcome to Turning Point School of Art. I'm Professor Sarah Perks, and this is week 2, which is all about everyday objects, and this is a special focus on pop art. Pop art started as a British and American movement with lots of young artists who started to feel like the artwork they were seeing around them was old and boring. Didn't really connect with their experiences. So they looked to popular culture for inspiration. Here's some work by artist Roy Lichtenstein, for example, that uses comic books. Popular culture generally refers to stuff like movies, comics, advertisements, posters, things that we see every day. Here's where the everyday objects come in. This was all about those ordinary or mass-produced objects that back then, in the 50s and 60s, were really not seen in art galleries. They also wanted their work to have mass appeal and to talk to more people. The critics in museums were aghast. A tin of soup? Nowadays, Andy Warhol's soup can pictures are pretty familiar and pretty valuable. In fact, they kind of look a little old-fashioned. Well, this was 58 years ago. Art history books focus on these artists like Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, Robert Rauschenberg, and Richard Hamilton. Of course, artists at this time weren't really all men, but back then women artists were a little bit left out. However, there's actually lots of great examples. Carita Kent is interesting because she was a Catholic nun. I bet you didn't expect me to say that. And she did some fantastic artwork in the 1960s and 70s. She presented simple pieces that had timely messages. In this work, she takes the text from a men's aftershave advert and puts it with quotes from philosophy and Winnie the Pooh and an aeroplane, a positive message and also connected to her religion. In this piece, she references the US-Vietnam War. A bit later, artist Deborah Cass made this work, Blue Deb, where she's literally having a pop at Andy Warhol and his failure to have positive representations of women. She uses her own image instead to celebrate female artist achievement. Okay, where pop art gets really interesting for me is when it goes to China. I bet you didn't expect me to say that either. China wasn't an easy place in the 1960s and 70s. Chairman Mao had this cultural revolution, which is not as good as it sounds, and actually was really quite brutal. After it ended in 1977, artists looked for new ways to deal with it and to address the pain. Also, in 1979, Deng Xiaoping opened up China, launching it into the global marketplace, basically the start of the consumer modernization that, wait, that's my school of history. Let's just say artists in China took these two things and created political pop. So they took images of American consumer goods from pop art and added them to old propaganda posters. Here is some of Wang Guangyi's work. He did a series for 17 years called The Great Criticism. So we have the Cultural Revolution propaganda posters and all these logos from Western advertising. His family were railway workers in Harbin, a far-flung rural place in the northeast of China. He also did railway work until he finally got into art college after 4 attempts. And now? Well, he's a millionaire, of course. Today, a new wave of Chinese artists are using pop culture and all things digital to inspire their practice. Liu Yang borrows many references from pop culture, including gaming, anime, pop music. A lot of these influences come from Japan. She's one of a new generation brought up accessing a massive pop culture on the internet, and she blends this with her interest in science and religion. She sees her work as a type of meditation. She sees looking at the materialism of everyday objects in a totally different way to traditional pop art. So instead of tin cans and celebrity images, we've got something else, an explosive and fractured world accessed through the digital. Here in this piece, she works with Japanese pop producers and uses an animation program called Miku Miku Dance and presents it as a video game. Speaking of Japan, if pop art has one queen bee, it's the ridiculously popular and successful Yayoi Kusama, now aged 91. You might remember I inserted her pumpkin image in the video pieces by Jai and Umberto earlier this week. Kusama is all about the dots. She calls these dots infinity nets and says she started to create them aged 10 through visions she was having. Kusama grew up in a fairly wealthy family and was obsessed with painting and becoming an artist. Her family were not that keen on her choices, but she managed to go to art school. So from works on paper, she moved to covering surfaces, walls, floors, canvases. Then a bit later, household objects, even people, covering them all, of course, with dots. She moved to America in 1958. Japan was proving too small and traditional for her vision, and she put herself into the New York art scene in the 1960s, though she would discover many of the same issues as in Japan. She was not taken seriously as a woman, and now had racism to contend with too. Kusama is also an artist who's been very open about how art has been her way of dealing with her mental health. She talks of how art became her version of therapy, helping her to visually express feelings that she couldn't understand or process as a child, specifically the many dots she would see in her hallucinations. She talks about the power of art as healing and also peaceful. She's only really seen her work get proper acknowledgement in the last couple of decades. Right now, or when it reopens, her infinity mirrored room is back to visit at Tate Modern in London until at least May 2021. Her infinity rooms, in fact, are so popular that one museum had to limit just how much time people spend in them, perfecting their selfies, giving everyone just 30 seconds each to nail that shot. And through social media, contemporary art begins to reach those everyday audiences again. Just what those pop artists always wanted.